Parliament on Tuesday approved legislation to change how the country's vice president is elected. Opposition, the Movement for Democratic Change, says the move by President Emmerson Mnangagwa is intended to concentrate power in the presidency. The Parliament has also extended the tenure of senior judges who will now be appointed by the President in consultation with the Judicial Service Commission instead of the candidates being subjected to public interviews, as has always been the case in the past. To discuss this now, we're joined by international relations analyst Dr. Chido Nyere. Dr. Nyere, good evening and thank you so much for your time tonight. Let's just begin with your reaction. When you saw that Parliament made such a move, what went through your mind?
Good evening, Bongiwe, and good evening to the viewers. I was not quite surprised, to be honest, that this has come to result in the dropping off of the running mates clause. But in order to understand what has happened, maybe it is important for us to historicize so that we understand the travesty that has been meted to the Zimbabwean constitution. So let's go back to 2013, or rather pre-2013. The situation has always been that the president had a lot of power, uncapped and immoderate power. So he had excessive powers in the sense that the president would appoint vice presidents on his own without any consultation whatsoever, right? So this was the situation that existed prior to 2013. Now, I highlight the year 2013 because the year 2013 is when we saw Zimbabwe adopting a new constitution. Prior to that, Zimbabwe operated under what we called the Lancaster House Constitution, which was really a creation of 1979, when Zimbabwe had just come out of a war, the civil war that Zimbabwe went through. So 2013 was important in that it adopted a progressive constitution. And in that constitution, there was an important clause that came with the president and the president's powers. The clause was called the running mates clause. Now, what it stipulated was that the president, when he faces election, he or she, when a president goes for election, the president will appoint 2 vice presidents. And this appointment does not really hold water. The appointment is designed to put the candidates to a vote, to an election. So he appoints these 2, and he or she designates who the first vice president will be and who the second vice president will be. So this was the clause that was seen to have been a liberal move, one move that meant to take away excessive power from the president. However, this clause did not come into effect immediately, right? So they held the clause at abeyance for 10 years. So from 2013, it was supposed to lapse in 2023. And this is the next year of election in Zimbabwe. Now, let's go back again to 2018. In 2018, the Zimbabwean electorate chose and voted for the current legislature. And I want to highlight the fact that the legislature is important because those members of parliament who were there, were appointed by election. So they were subjected to an election by the electorate, and the electorate ascended to say this is the legislature that will represent us. However, that has also changed in the sense that there were some opposition members of parliament who were withdrawn from the parliament, from the legislature. Now, these members of parliament who were withdrawn from the legislature were replaced by other members of parliament who were not elected. So this actually means that there has been an imposition in terms of members of parliament who then passed this Constitution Amendment Bill number 2, which dropped off the running mate clause before it even materialized. So it was there in the Constitution. Of course, it was held at abeyance for 10 years. The 10 years was supposed to lapse in 2023. And now it simply means we have reverted back to the pre-2013 situation, where the president has a lot of power. And I have to agree with the opposition in terms of their assertion there. It has returned us to 2013, prior to 2013, where the president has a lot of uncapped power, because as it stands, the president can appoint. Now he has the power to appoint 2 of his vice presidents.
So certainly, then, from what you're saying and even describing, what this then means going forward, it cannot be good for the country.
Of course, it cannot be good, definitely. It simply means we are returning again to an era where dictatorialism will be the rule, an era where authoritarian rule will be the order of the day. And this is what we wanted to distance ourselves as Zimbabweans when it was put to the referendum and people voted and were consulted in terms of adopting the 2013 constitution. We cannot say the same thing right now. As they change and chop the constitution, people are not being consulted. And part of their ploy to do this is to enlist the help of these unelected members of parliament.
And when you then look at even this move to then take, the process of appointing judges away from the public glare, where you would have seen judges go through a process of being interviewed, a grilling. Now, the president, together with, the judicial service, are then going to be appointing judges. What then does this mean for, judicial freedom in Zimbabwe? Because this is not a new concern. We have been seeing a lot of concerns around the freedom of the judiciary in that particular country.
So there are concerns, and rightly so, that then there is consolidation of power, and of course there are also scares of a one-party state, because the opposition in parliament is not effective, as it has been replaced by opposition appointed by the ZANU-PF regime. Now, in terms of going forward, it also speaks to the issue of assaulting the judiciary itself. The very fact that the president can appoint, and has already done so in effect, appoint senior judges without consulting anyone, without the judges undergoing public interviews, it simply means that we are returning to the consolidation of power, where the president, and in this case, the ZANU-PF regime, has unwarranted power, really. Now, it simply means the separation of powers clause, which is also contained in the Constitution of Zimbabwe, has also been traversed. Now, there is no clear distinction in terms of the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. The legislature, one can already argue that since they had the two-thirds majority, they could have changed the constitution. But in terms of the constitutional court now, when anyone wants to go and take this case to appeal, they cannot do so because the senior judges are appointed by the president. Therefore, those that he will appoint will be judges that have seen, that have indicated and have shown a support or an endorsement of this current regime. So there is no separation of powers. Ironically, the Zimbabwean constitution speaks of separation of powers, but in effect, it is really a one-party state.
And when you then look at, the scrapping of the running mate, and you go back to that time when former President, late former President Robert Mugabe was then, whose power was then usurped, and he then had to be ousted. And, we then saw the rise of Emmerson Mnangagwa to that particular office of president in Zimbabwe. Some were saying that the crisis was also created by the fact that there was no clear succession plan, which is what then led to the crisis that Zimbabwe then found itself in at the time. Would you say then that a move like this to scrap the presidential running mate and to introduce such legislation into power then paves the way for, Emmerson Mnangagwa as president of Zimbabwe to then start paving his own way of how the succession plan will unfold should he then decide to leave office?
Certainly, it has implications towards that. But let's paint a picture here. So before the dispose of former President Robert Mugabe, the new dispensation, as they called themselves, the Second Republic, they overpromised in terms of what they really intended to do. And because of the euphoria of the time, a lot of people really thought former President Robert Mugabe had overstayed his welcome. So there was a lot of euphoria and there were a lot of expectations. Now, in hindsight, you will realize that this regime, the ZANU-PF regime, played into people's euphoria and people's expectations and overpromised. When it comes to the delivery of what they promised, they are not really distinct in terms of the First Republic now that they are in office. But there is also something we should be looking at here. In terms of the succession race within ZANU-PF, it has always been unclear, and I think this was part of the plan of the first regime and now this subsequent regime. Part of it is that with having clear succession plans, it will mean that we revert to the running mates clause, because the running mates clause was precisely to guard against succession plans. So as it is now, it means the president appoints his vice presidents. Should the president be incapacitated or dies in office, it simply means the party has to reconvene and appoint somebody that has not been put through an election. So again, it is a reversal of the gains that the 2013 constitution brought for Zimbabwe. And again, it is a betrayal of the people's vote and the people's trust in terms of giving this government a chance in 2018
and
at the elections.
And Dr. Nyara, as a final question then, part of what, also happened here is that the National Assembly has also extended the lifespan of the women's quota in the National Assembly by 10 years and also approved the introduction of a youth quota as a way of, to empower young people to join politics. At face value, this may sound like a good move to persuade young people to join and also to ensure that there's enough women in power, but is it really, a good move?
So I'm glad you say at face value, because that's exactly what it is. This is just a facade. Including the women's quota could come with advantages, yes, because there is need for gender mainstreaming, not only in Zimbabwe, but in Africa in general and the whole world, to be quite frank. However, this is not sincere, it is not genuine. And I will tell you why I say so. The very fact that the senior judges, right, who are now not subjected to public interview, in terms of their serving, they were curtailed to serve up until they turned 70. That has also been extended by another 5 years. And if you want to assess this, it really tells you that the women's quota, the youth's quota, all this was really a facade, so that when they present the real issue here, which is really the control of the judiciary, people may want to believe that this is for the betterment of everyone, it is for the good of the country, which definitely it is not.
All right, Dr. Chido Nyerere, just talking to us about this latest, move by Parliament to scrap presidential running mate rule. Thank you so much for your time tonight. And we were hoping to speak to Nelson Chamisa, but, we were simply no longer getting through to him. And he had confirmed that he would be part of this conversation, but we are now struggling to, reach him. But we are still trying and to see if it is possible for us to still have him on the show just to talk to us about this particular issue, because they've been very vocal about it, and the opposition has really come out very strongly against this particular move. And it is something that the opposition says it looks like it's a concentration of power into one office. And Dr. Chido Nyerere also, even agreeing with the opposition, as he even began the chat by saying that he agrees with the opposition stance on this matter, because it does look like power is now going to be concentrated in one office, where the president can then choose his running mate, and the party can then put somebody, should the president be incapacitated, will put somebody who is has not been elected into public office. So certainly there a lot of concern around this move by Parliament to scrap the presidential running mate.